Good afternoon, everyone. It's David Leis here, your proud host of Leaders on the Frontier. It's June 19, 2025, the year of our Lord. So we're grateful to have this discussion today. We're going to cover an awful lot of things. We're going to connect the dots on issues from Iran and the strikes that Israel's undertaken in Iran and what that means for us. What does that mean for you as Canadians? As we look at a myriad of issues that are happening domestically, but internationally. So I think you'll find this to be a fascinating discussion. And we are just so grateful that we can come together in terms of these discussions. We really appreciate your feedback and your involvement. And so, good afternoon, Prairie. Yet again, I think you must hold the record for involvement. On leaders. So it's just delightful. We get thousands of comments from people, and so I want to just highlight that we've got some very interesting comments from you, and we really do appreciate them. And I was going to bring them up, Madam Producer, just to highlight those. For example, I am a new subscriber and love how you relate to your audience. It's clear you care about your fellow Canadians, and that's with Heal Me Today. Thank you very much. And Caitlin says, love these grounded in truth, facts, and common sense conversations. Just terrific, intelligent information. So thank you very much for that comment, Kate. That means a lot to us. So I can't respond to all of them, but I do try to respond to many comments. So, but all of them are very much appreciated. So thank you so much. And I know it's making a difference. It's interesting. I just ran into a wonderful couple in Winnipeg, and they were just incredible people. And anyways, we had a long conversation about why they listen in and the work that we're doing at the Frontier Center, and they really commended the work of Brian Giesbrecht, retired judge, among many others. So thank you so much for that feedback. And Karina's a new subscriber, so welcome. And I just encourage you to subscribe, like the program. It helps us. But if you subscribe, then you get those notices in terms of what's happening in terms of programs. So don't hesitate to do that. It's a great way to kind of keep in touch. We have a very ambitious program, and as usual, I wanted to highlight a few headlines, and I think you'll find those interesting as yet again we connect the dots. And one of them I just wanted to mention is that Dr. Jordan Peterson, you may recall, is getting a quote re-education program through what's called the Ontario College of Psychologists and Behavioral Analysts. I believe that's the new name. And he's indicated that his re-education coach has, quote, been chosen by the college. And he's being, you may recall from history, he's from last year, that he's being, quote, re-educated in terms of well, his behavior. So stay tuned on that. I think he wants it to be a transparent process, and transparency is a very important principle in public policy. How do you have accountability? How do you have high functioning systems without transparency? So stay tuned on that one. I also wanted to highlight that Colin May, who's a senior fellow at Frontier, we released a program this week about his quote cancellation. He does some really thoughtful, heartfelt reflection, not only on his own story about, but the nature of cancellation in our society. So we really value, as you know, healthy debate at Frontier and society. So I would encourage you to look at that. It's also interesting that according to recent polls, immigration is still too high for a slim majority. The government poll finds it was just released. Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada commissioned this survey as part of its annual tracking of public sentiment towards immigration and reported it publicly as part of its government's disclosures in its public opinion research. And the survey suggests that 54% of Canadians said they felt that there are just simply too many immigrants coming to Canada. Another 34% said that they felt the number was fine according to the report, and that's as reported in the National Post. So I encourage you to stay tuned about that file. And I also wanted to mention that it's very interesting that eyes are turning to Canada as a haven for certain officials coming from Iran. Apparently, there's a concern that a number of officials from Iran as they anticipate perhaps the collapse of the regime for their own safety are coming to Canada. So is this true? I'm not entirely sure. So that's an unfolding story as well. So today we're going to talk about Iran and Israel, but we're going to wade through a number of key issues that have been occurring this last week. As you know, we meet every Thursday. So there's been a lot of interesting conversations related to the G7 meetings. Um, there's been a lot of rhetoric coming out of the last federal election about elbows up, but here they are with their elbows down as they stand up in front of the beautiful, beautiful view at Kananaskis in Alberta. You can see the lineup. I believe it includes from the EU representative all the way through to, of course, Donald Trump there with the blue tie, and Kurt Starmer with the Prime Minister of the UK, and of course, our Prime Minister is there in the middle. And we've got the leaders of France, Italy, as well as Japan, and I believe India there, if I'm mistaken. So the meeting will be talking about the all of this, but it is interesting. I did want to mention an interesting clip here, a bit of a compare and contrast between the rhetoric in terms of the relationship between our prime minister and, of course, Donald Trump here. So I think that would be an interesting one to share here as we look at the difference in contrasts here.
I don't think we can change Donald Trump. I don't think so. Not at this stage. And a person who draws his inspiration from President Trump, like Pierre Poilievre, will kneel down before him, before he stands up to him.
Ever be part of the United States in any way, shape, or form. We have to recognize that the Donald Trump of today is different than the Donald Trump of several years ago. Then his objective was to take more of our market. Now he wants to take our country. Let me finish by pointing. Welcome to Canada.
Thank you very much.
It's a great honor. Happy birthday. A few days short.
A little bit.
A few days short, but didn't have a chance to see you on the day. Happy birthday to the U.S. military as well, 250th, and this is the 50th birthday, if you will, of the G7. This marks the 50th birthday of the G7, and the G7 is nothing without U.S. leadership, and your personal leadership of the United States, many issues, geopolitics, economic, technology, and working hand in hand with the United States, Canada and the United States, and the other G7 partners with your leadership. Very much looking forward to the meeting. I'm grateful to have you.
Thank you very much, Mark. I appreciate it, and we've developed a very good relationship.
So there you have it. It's an interesting, I think, a brilliant clip from our producer, Lorraine, as she kind of served up an interesting contrast. We know that elections are elections, but diplomatic moments are diplomatics moments. So the rhetoric did change there. But we'll get to that reflection because I have two extraordinary guests. They're associates at Frontier, and I want to welcome them because I can't think of better people to talk about and reflect about, well, the interplay between domestic security issues, what appears to be an emerging war in the Middle East, let's hope not, with Iran and Israel. And I want to welcome Colonel David Redman. He's retired, and David has an extraordinary background working with both, of course, the armed forces on missions near and far, but also looking at the issues of security issues and terrorism, as well as emergency planning in Canada. So a warm welcome to you, David.
Thank you for having me.
And then I also want to welcome Scott McGregor. He's an associate with Frontier. You can see his writings as well. And Scott, you have been an intelligence security analyst with both the armed forces, the RCMP, and you continue to consult in that field. So a warm welcome to you, Scott.
Thanks, David. Glad to be here.
So, gentlemen, I want to start with the G7. We're going to wade through a lot of different issues, including the security announcements and a variety of issues on the geopolitical stage. But help me understand what happened at the G7. David, what do you think were the highlights coming out of that? Any observations?
Well, I think the G7 has found itself in the middle of many issues, but certainly their relevancy seems to have diminished with what we've seen happening in the world over the past year and what Europe / NATO the positions that it's taking, and all the different conflicts that are going on inside each of the G7 countries. Forget what's happening outside of them. Inside each of those countries, we're seeing turbulence caused by dissension within our own countries, funded by China, and in many cases run and orchestrated by the Islamic Republican Guard in our streets every day. And this isn't a Canadian phenomenon. This is a phenomenon throughout the G7. So it's orchestrated, it's planned, it's been going on for 2 decades. But I put it to you, for the last decade in Canada, it has been the issue of paramountcy that we have completely ignored intentionally, I believe, by our government. So when I see these leaders coming together talking about these issues, the biggest problem they have is internal. And before they solve those problems, their ability to influence externally is compromised.
Okay, so there you have it. David, you've given us a very interesting connection of the dots that not as all as it seems as you dare to connect the issues of internal challenges with external actors. So there's bad actors out there. Is that right, David?
Absolutely. And we see them in our streets every day. But one of the things Canadians need to recognize is that when you see the protests in Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa, across our country, Vancouver, it's amazing how the placards and the signage and the materials seem to be all the same. And we see truckloads of materials being delivered into each of these groups. So who's funding all that? Well, the funding's coming directly from China into Iran, and then Iran is being the proxy that's bringing it into our country. But of course, China has been massively active in Canada for the past decade with absolutely no challenge. And we've seen it over and over again. Their influence in our election system, the influence into our industry and our private institutions. China is overtly now challenging all of the institutions of our country, from our courts to our police to each and every one of the elements that we used to take for granted in Canada. I put it to you that China's doing the same thing in all of the G7 countries. And so if we haven't already realized that we're in war, we should wake up, because it's been going on in Canada overtly for 10 years.
Okay, wow, that's quite an analysis, and you certainly don't hear it much, certainly in the legacy media. So I want to turn to you, Scott. What are your observations, and do you kind of, well, concur with what David is talking about here? We're actually at war, but in a different way. I mean, you're the author, I should note, of the Mosaic Effect. I recommend it. It's a brilliant book that talks a lot about this. What is your take on this, Scott? And I think we may have a technical connection there with Scott McGregor. We'll bring him back. So, David, when you say about war, what do you mean by that? I mean, I think often in our mind's eye when we think about war, we think of a kinetic or hot war. That's not what you're referring to per se, or is it?
So maybe a quick step back. 6 national interests define a country. The second of them is national security. National security is made up of 9 major elements. The first being our intelligence services, the second being our border services, then our immigration services, protection of critical infrastructure, policing services, judicial system, the emergency management system, our alliance and partnerships, and then finally your actual standing army that you use to prosecute a war. So your Canadian Armed Forces, Army, Navy, and Air Force. What we've seen in the past 10 years is every single one of those 9 elements that I just listed have been penetrated or manipulated by China in our country. That is an overt war used by other means. War, Clausewitz said that war is simply politics by another means. Well, the politics that's being waged in our country is an overt challenge to every one of our democratic institutions, and in particular, every one of those 9 national security institutions. And we've seen it play out in our legacy media, but we've also seen it playing out on all of our alternate systems and listening. And legacy media wants to downplay it, in fact, wants to support some of these actions. So I find it impossible for Canadians to have a clear and full picture unless they join into these type of discussions and search for the information. But yes, I believe that we've been in a state of war And we constantly try and make the discussion that China might be a competitor. It's not. It's a challenger to our democracy, and they are an enemy of our democracy. And they're using their bricks and mortar Silk Road initiative to fund many, many countries in the world. But the predominant one that they've been using for the past number of years, two in fact, is the IRGC, the Islamic Republican Guard, the military wing of the state of Iran, who is marching in our streets and organizing in our streets. And you just saw the complete flip from support for Hamas to support for Iran with what's just going on with Israel and Iran in the last week. So this is a coordinated, concentrated attack on our institutions. So I don't know what else you would call it other than war.
Okay, so this is quite a larger picture that you may not have been anticipating in our conversation today, but we're going to dare to connect the dots that you can't just simply separate, well, domestic issues from these geopolitical issues. And China is really, in many respects, a key actor that is visible or frankly not visible behind the scenes. So this is a fascinating discussion. So I want to turn to you, Scott. You're the author, and by the way, Robert Kerr from the audience says Scott's book, The Mosaic Effect, should be recommended reading for all Canadians, especially Liberal supporters. Well, we're not partisan; we think all parties.
Correct.
But no, clearly, that's a great compliment. So thank you, Robert. So Scott, over to you. Is David's overview and analysis, and he even mentions the 9 elements within war. What's your take on this?
So I had a little bit of a technical difficulty and I missed some of the conversation, but I'm back. Well, I would dare say, going back to the original portion of the question regarding the G7, I think some of the statecraft that we see occurring within the G7 is pretty noteworthy. I think the move towards de-risking versus decoupling, I think that's something that is significant. I think people that were invited is very strategic, considering what we know is going on now, and I think that plays into a lot of the different pieces. Now I'll move forward to the China discussion. You mentioned my book. My co-author Ina Mitchell and I spent a lot of time,
Indeed,
years, getting this out. We went through incredible hoops when it comes to the legal aspects of getting it vetted, and that's quite significant given the fact that lawfare has become such a predominant situation for many people trying to get the word out, create awareness. Myself included, have lawfare cases by the Chinese against me. So we see this, across Canada and the United States. With the military defense spending stuff, I think I'm not sure if we've even touched on that yet, but I think
well,
that's something
we haven't touched on that. Maybe we could hold that for a sec. But on the security side, there is a bigger picture going on here. Like you referenced it in your book, Scott, the so-called Vancouver model of, well, what is that? Can you explain that to us?
Well, the Vancouver model was coined by an Australian academic, and it basically relates to how money is laundered by the Chinese through casinos and other other elements. What we see is a connection between the Iranians, the Chinese, and the cartels in Canada. That is the most significant activity with regards to hybrid warfare, so transnational organized crime, political influence, and economic subversion. Those things play out across the country. I would say the center of gravity is definitely Vancouver. The largest Iranian diaspora in the world, post-Shah, is in North Vancouver. And there's plenty of people there that are scared for their lives because the IRGC, Quds Force, Mois, which is the intelligence agency of Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, and others all operate within Canadian borders. So that's a pretty significant thing. Now, when you tie that into transnational organized crime, especially with the Chinese, where we have different triad groups, but also state-sponsored activity from the People's Liberation Army and their security forces and intelligence that are operating here, we get some pretty dangerous combinations. Couple that with the cartels and what we're hearing about fentanyl right now, you can see that there's a lot going on, and although attention has been drawn to this, I believe that we're not real. Our efforts are token. I would say that right now, with the distraction of what's going on in the Middle East, I think a lot of things at home aren't being looked at in the manner that we would hope. Although with these increased threats globally, we're going to see people becoming much more aware and want to know what's going on and what's being done about it. And I think that's
Mhm.
kind of the key to moving the dial.
All right. So just to back up for a sec, so you're saying that there's a lot going on from a security issue in Canada, the infiltration of foreign actors, particularly the Communist Party of China. But in this context, I guess the question would be, why does this matter to Canadians? Why should we care? Is there a short answer to that silly question, Scott?
I don't believe there is a short answer. Hybrid warfare is very complex. It's very humbling. Some people will say we're subject matter experts on a topic, and yet there's so many aspects of it where there's other people that have a lot more knowledge. I'll lean on David here to say that I don't know everything, but I have pretty good insights and I have a good network, so I get a better understanding of some of these things. And what does it matter to Canadians? It matters in every single aspect of their life. Everything is being impacted right now, from economics to politics, and some of this is playing out in the media, and we're seeing it. The question really is, what are Canadians ready to accept? Because it seems like we have these protests that are supporting known terrorist organizations, and we're allowing this kind of activity and sentiment to resonate within our own citizens, and that's disturbing. Um, and the people that are on the sidelines that are questioning this and using some common sense are starting to go, when's enough enough? Because now we have issues with housing, with food supply, supply chains. There's all kinds of things that are impacted, and how they impact Canadians is starting to show more and more. And as it becomes more um, uh, prioritized, I guess, by Canadians, we can see that they want to do something about it, and we're starting to get that feeling now.
Mhm.
And I think perhaps this conflict with Iran and Israel, I think that's heightening those feelings. So it's behavioral science to a certain extent. Canadians are known to be resilient. We tend to take things as they come. We might complain, but we kind of just get on with it.
Mhm.
Uh, and there comes a time when that's going to wear out. Same with our kindness, same with our apologies. All of those things are starting to wear thin. They've worn thin. I've been in conflict. I've been in Afghanistan. They target you just the same being a Canadian as you do a U.S. soldier now. That never used to be the way. You'll talk to a lot of people that talk about peacekeeping and peacemaking, and they would say, we're the Canadians. We're the kind of the neutral guys. That's shifted, and
Mhm.
sentiment isn't the same as it was towards Canadians as it was 10, 15 years ago.
Mhm.
These things are something that I think we need to consider when we're looking at policy, especially foreign policy, but also corporately with our own businesses, and recognizing where exactly you stand when you start doing business with some of these
Mhm.
countries that are threats to our national security and our allies.
Okay, so this has a big impact on Canadians. You've mentioned a number of them, Scott. Before I turn to David with that question, I want to just highlight a comment from the audience. Sheridan Forbes says money laundering, mortgage fraud, and low internet rates, or sorry, interest rates, pardon me, are more valued than the prosperity of future generations. Previous generations and government have decided to sacrifice that prosperity for it. So, thank you for that comment, Sheridan. So, turning to you, David, why should Canadians care about these security issues?
Well, because it affects every single walk of our life. So let's start with the geopolitical picture that people want to throw away. We share a continent with the superpower. The United States is and will be, at least for our lifetimes, the superpower for democracy. And we share a continent with them. And if we don't take our security seriously, then that superpower to our south is going to have to take it seriously for us. And there's an old saying, every country has an army, theirs or somebody else's. I don't want the United States to have to take over Canada because we don't take our national security seriously. But more specifically, why does this actually impact all Canadians? There's 6 national interests that define a democracy: unity, national security, good governance, good democratic governance, rights and freedoms, economic prosperity and growth, and personal societal well-being. Now, each one of those 6 can be broken out into sub-bullets, and I've already broken out national security into the 9 in the earlier portion. But every one of those 6 national interests that defines our country of Canada has been attacked, and with intent to destroy each one of them. So the unity of our peoples, the government intentionally pitting small groups against each other, finding wedge issues and trying to fracture our society, and doing it with the aid of foreign influence in our country. Let's talk about the Chinese police stations that were discovered in our country. Let's talk about the Chinese interference in our election system. Let's talk, all under good governance. Let's talk about each one of those 6 national interests and how the lives of everyday Canadians have been impacted in each one of those 6 areas for the past 10 years by foreign actors in our country. And Canadians need to see that our unity has been broken up. Why is it that Alberta wants to secede from Canada? There's wedge issues being used to divide West and East in our country. They were always there, but there's really strong actors now playing vital roles trying to split our country into parts, whether it's geographically, whether it's culturally, whether it's based on religions. No matter which of the elements, our unity is being fractured. Our national security, every one of those 9 elements I listed, has been denigrated or destroyed. Look at the armed forces as the canary in the coal mine, but let's start with our intelligence services that have been ignored and belittled by our legacy media for 10 years now. They've given up trying to advise a government that simply refuses to listen. Let's talk about our border services. Let's talk about the destroyed immigration services. I believe there should be a 1-year pause on all forms of immigration and refugees coming into Canada until we can figure out what we're going to do, because it's impacting every one of our 6. But let's talk about an economic prosperity and growth. When the people under the age of 25 can't find work, 25% of our under 25-year-olds are unemployed. Why? Because we're bringing mass immigration in that are taking all those entry-level jobs. I have 6 grandchildren that are all in their late teens and early 20s. Trying to find a job this summer to go back to school in the fall, next to impossible. Every single one of those 6 national interests, our good governance, our economic prosperity and growth, our rights and freedoms, and our societal and individual well-being. So why does it matter, Canadians? They should be seeing this happening when we have the longest lineup for food banks in the history of our country, other than the Great Depression. But we're coming close to the same numbers as the Great Depression that my parents grew up in. And so to me, why should Canadians care? And as Scott has just said, I think some Canadians, and hopefully a majority, are starting to recognize that every one of those 6 national interests in their personal lives are being affected. I don't know if you ever watched Regina Goldman at the National Citizens Inquiry. She was a lady who was one of the initial people in the Solidarity movement in Poland in 1981. She was tortured for 9 years in prison and escaped to Canada after that. And she came to the National Citizens Inquiry to warn us that our rights and freedoms were being destroyed as she had seen. But she said a very telling statement, that the people of Poland refused to join the Solidarity movement until something happened. And that was their economy finally completely failed and everyone was lining up for bread every single morning. And she said, suddenly everybody wanted to join Solidarity. I hope it doesn't take Canadians that point, all the way to that point, before they wake up, because it's obvious what's happening in our streets right now.
Okay, so well said, David. You connected, I think, the dots very well. These issues are interconnected. You can't separate them. We need good governance. We need good national security, both inside the country and as we relate to the geopolitical scene. It relates to everything in our lives, including the ability of our young people to find a job. I mean, anyone can see that. In terms of, well, if you go to any fast food outlet, then it begs the issue: do they employ kids down the neighborhood street? I mean, I don't want to generalize, but these initial jobs matter as you gain job experience and move forward as a high functioning adult in our society. So, gosh, man, that's quite a list there. So I've got a lot of comments coming in here. It's interesting that Kenzie Kraken said, "Yes, I met Regina at the National Citizens Inquiry, and she was amazing." I think that was reference to the person that gave that powerful testimony, given her experience in communist Poland. I think it's so we're in a stage here where we're reflecting on the G7 and domestic issues. And I want to highlight a very interesting meeting that was also held this past week between the provinces, the representatives of Saskatchewan and Alberta. And we've got some pictures here that illustrate there Scott Moe, the Premier of Saskatchewan, meeting with the Premier of Alberta. And they outlined with their caucuses all in tow there. So that's quite a group. And they had this interesting summit, and I think they produced kind of a summary of demands that they're looking to. This is a post from Daniel Smith, and I want to just highlight them quickly. End federal interference in provincial resource development, scrap the emission cap and clean electricity regulations, repeal the Impact Assessment Act, and lift the tanker ban on the West Coast, reject the net zero vehicle mandate and restore regulatory clarity, guarantee port-to-port pipeline access to Tidewater, get these products to the ocean, to other customers beyond the United States, remove U.S. tariffs and fight back against unfair trade barriers from China. Now, I find this very interesting because we've heard a lot about the Trump tariffs, as we don't even have free trade within Canada. But we haven't really heard a lot about the Chinese tariffs that are impacting this country, particularly the agricultural sector. So I noticed that at the G7, there was a picture of Donald Trump waving an agreement with the Prime Minister, UK, Mr. Starmer, celebrating, I believe, their agreement on trade, but we don't have one yet. So does that concern you, Scott, that we don't have an agreement yet with our main trading partner, namely the United States?
Yeah, I believe it's pretty concerning, definitely. Where that's going to happen, or when that's going to happen, is anyone's guess. I think, given the issues with security between Canada and the United States, and the concerns that they have with what's going on in Canada, I don't think we're going to see anything right away. We're seeing some capitulation on the Canadian side, but not to the extent that you would expect. Issuing one Black Hawk helicopter, which is leased from the United States and flown by a United States pilot and maintained by United States service members, to cover the entire border of Canada, the United States, and then just simple things like that. I don't see us being viewed as trustworthy in terms of actually addressing what's going on in Canada. I think a lot of these things are being viewed as being token. They know what's going on here. I've been discussing these things for a decade with the United States, of what's going on in Canada, so they know exactly what's transpiring here. Until the government decides to step up and take matters seriously, as we've been discussing already, I don't think they're going to, just offer up these conciliatory types of tariffs for us, because we're a threat to their national security right now. And until that changes, I don't think anything's going to happen. I think this conflict right now in the Middle East is definitely a wake-up call for a lot of people. And we're only talking about, Iran, Israel. We're not looking at all the pieces that are here in Canada that are functioning to undermine the United States. And that's the key thing. A lot of people go, oh, there's organized crime everywhere. There's all these things happening in other countries. That's kind of true, but they're not the largest trading partner with the largest economy in the world. We are. And we permit all of the terrorist organizations to operate with impunity. We allow transnational organized crime to conduct their operations here, and we don't do anything about it. I mean, if you take, for instance, the fentanyl super lab that was just busted not so long ago, one person has been arrested for that. One. This is 80 something million doses of fentanyl, enough to kill the population twice over. And we've got one person in jail. We can also look at the TD Bank. I mean, the largest financial fine in history, and we haven't arrested anybody. We don't have anybody in jail. So there's definitely concerns on the United States side where they're wondering, we're telling you about these things. So this is the United States telling us about a fentanyl lab. This is the United States telling us about this financial issue that we have with our banks. Canada's not doing that, and Canada's not doing anything about it. So I don't think that they're in a rush to make deals with us until we start taking them seriously.
Okay, so there you have it. Scott, you're basically saying, if I'm hearing you correctly, we've got serious security issues. We've got to address them because from the US point of view, among other allies, they see security as number one. And if you don't have your security stuff together, then you will not be at the economic table. Is that your take on it too, David?
Absolutely. After September 11th, on September 12th, I ended up being appointed ultimately as the Director of Counterterrorism for the province of Alberta and worked on both sides of the border extensively for the next decade. It was said very clear by Paul Cellucci, the American ambassador to Canada, to my face, but starting on 12 September 2001, security trumps trade. He said it over and over and over again in the media. Canadians got all upset and said a whole bunch of things. So this isn't the first time Canada's been called out. And we were able, to some degree, back in the early 2000s to show that we did take it seriously. But I put it to you, for the last decade, our largest trading partner and our massive partner in the security of North America to the south knows we've intentionally done exactly the opposite for the past decade. We have allowed every piece, those 9 elements I listed in national security, to be compromised. And we've done it intentionally. So the United States, quite rightly, is very upset with us. But I put it to you that Mr. Trump and his tariffs, President Trump, not meaning to be derogatory, President Trump will be President Trump. Canada's problems and all of our ability to defend our own country isn't caused by Trump. It's caused by us for the past 10 years, destroying every piece of the 6 national interests that define our country. And so we need to stop being the lowest GDP per capita in the OECD. It's time. We can turn all these things around within our own country. What we have to do is actually start caring about our country, our productivity, our economic ability, but at the same time, every one of those 9 elements, we have to restore our intelligence services to the stature that they were 10 years ago. And it was at a low state then. Let's make it twice as good as it was 10 years ago. We need to reinforce our border services. And as Scott points out, one Black Hawk helicopter manned by foreigners to cover 8,900 kilometers of our border is a joke. We need to rebuild our immigration system after a 1-year pause so that it matches the ability of our country to bring people into our country who are of value to our country, and to intentionally block those who are coming here for no other reason than to destroy our country. We need to identify and protect our critical infrastructure and do that in a coordinated manner across our country, but linking it directly to the municipal order of government who have police jurisdiction all the way up to the Canadian Armed Forces that are required over serious critical infrastructure, vital, necessary, significant, for the vital critical, to put no-fly zones in. Only the Air Force and certain ground elements can do that. We need to link together every piece, and then maybe we'll be taken seriously by our largest trading partner. But until we do, let's do the internal fix for our country, and let's do it now, or we're not going to be a country.
Okay, so that sounds like a wise outline, David. I'm talking with my guests, Colonel David Redman, retired, and also Scott McGregor, security analyst and leader in, I think, providing us valuable insight. So please like the program, share it. I think these are critical issues. And it's interesting, the comment earlier made was right here Canada is the security risk to itself. I mean, I just marvel at, and thank you, Sheridan, for that comment. I mean, surely this should be just common sense that we should, with our decision makers, that this should be a high priority. This is surely one of the seminal priority roles of any government is to protect its citizens and to ensure that so we can get on with a prosperous future. So this is all very much interrelated, and I really do appreciate the comments. So please like the program, share it, get it out there, because um, I'm going to say this a little bit tongue in cheek, and I mean this. I'm curious about your analysis, David and Scott. What about Bill C-2? This is the so-called Strong Border Act that has been that the federal government has tabled rather quickly. Is this an answer? Because just to put this into perspective, remember the Trump administration said many months ago that Canada, let alone to other world actors, we want, quote, fair and free trade. So we're going to put these tariffs and call it negotiation tactics, whatever you want to call it. That's what they're doing. But secondly, they said in Canada's case, we want you to become a NATO partner, get on with the 2%, rebuild your military, and we'll get to that in a moment. But thirdly, it was the border security element. They said, look, you've got a lot of money laundering going on, and everybody knows this in the intelligence military circles that Canada has serious security issues. And I would say it's not just the fentanyl labs, it's money laundering, it's all kinds of things. It's being a soft underbelly to the United States. But it's also the fact that we showed pictures of the port there, and that picture is to um, illustrate and underline that we only inspect maybe 1.5% of those containers coming into Canada. Now, it may have changed a little bit, but everyone has admitted to this. This is a huge problem, is it not? So Scott, what's your take on Bill C-2? What I think you've given some analysis about this, haven't you?
I have. In the past, we've had dialogue over um, how knee-jerk of a reaction it was to come up with something like this, knowing full well that the capabilities that exist within Canada are not capable of meeting the requirements that the United States is asking for. Some of that has to do with assets that we have. Some of that has to do with the laws that we and legislation. Um, so public confidence within our agencies and our government is probably at the lowest point ever. I mean, the head of the RCMP's intelligence, so the historic RCMP, is in prison. He's been convicted of national security crimes. Cameron Ortis.
Sorry. Yes, right. Cameron,
Right?
right.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
so the confidence with Canadians isn't exactly there. And then we look at our intelligence agency, which is a domestic intelligence agency. For those that don't know, that means they don't operate outside of Canada's borders. They don't have international mandates. They are just here in Canada. They're not the CIA. So we are very limited when it comes to those things. We'll talk about piping, which is information sharing, something I've been talking about for a very long time,
Mhm.
somewhat openly since I've left government. But in the United States, following 2011, when President Obama issued an executive order making transnational organized crime a national security threat and the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, they were able to share information at a classified level with law enforcement. Let me say that again. Classified information. So that is using military assets, etc., to collect information. And we've seen this with the cartels. We've seen some major cartels go down. And the reason is they are using assets to collect information and then turn it into evidence. In Canada, that doesn't exist.
Pardon
That
me?
doesn't exist.
Yep.
So sharing that information with law enforcement is extremely difficult. And that's because of two different things. R versus Jordan and R versus Stinchcombe. One is a disclosure piece, which means that every piece of information must be disclosed. So if you're a bad guy, the more information you give, and if it's written by handwriting in a foreign language that has to be translated by someone that even understands the codes that are going to be using, that can take a very long time. I can give you the for instance with an RCMP investigation called E-Pirate. It's the largest money laundering case in Canadian history. And the amount of information that was required to be translated and presented took 180 officers 2 years or more to try to get that information. They went through a number of different crown councils. So there's a lot of issues. If that goes beyond the 2 years, the case is thrown out. So that's what happens when you get into these very complex and large cases. Canada is incapable so far of prosecuting these things. If someone can prove me wrong, I'd love to hear it, but we're not seeing it. We're seeing low-hanging fruit get picked up for fentanyl things and these little token efforts, and you're trying to restore public confidence. There's nothing wrong with that, but the United States recognizes that we don't have the capacity to take on the scale and scope of what's happening in Canada. We just don't. When was the last time you saw somebody from Hezbollah arrested in Canada? They're here. IRGC is here. They were made a terrorist group too. So we have lots of tools. None of it is cohesive. If you want to get into the financial stuff, we can talk about FinTrack, which is not FinCEN, which is the US version, which has teeth, and they can do things that we cannot in Canada.
What is FinTrack again, Scott?
FinTrack, it's the financial tracking. Oh, geez, you're going to ask me for the actual acronym, and I can't recall it right now. Basically, they're an intelligence agency that looks at the finances of they're checking for a number of different things, but they look at the reporting on suspicious transaction reports and stuff that come from the financial institutions, casinos, etc. And they will identify where there are issues, and they will raise these issues with law enforcement. And law enforcement sometimes gets more insight from them, but they can't always prosecute with it. So there's this gap where we can't take information and turn it into evidence. And even if you turn it into evidence, it gets bottlenecked. As I've mentioned before, in British Columbia, a law enforcement officer cannot charge someone. In Alberta, they can. In Ontario, they can. But in BC, they can't. So it goes to Crown, and it's recommended that they press charges. But then it gets weighed out. What about Stinchcombe? What about Jordan? What about how much is this going to cost? How many assets are we going to take off the street? Because now we have to do all the things that are required to go to court. So those things get weighed, and sometimes those cases get thrown out just based on the fact that we don't have the capacity to do it. That's concerning. I mean, we're just starting to look at reverse onus, which is something Australia has been using for a long time. So when you walk in to buy a house for $5 million and you pay your lawyer in cash, because the lawyer doesn't actually have to report to FinTrack about the transaction because they are exempt. So now that money just comes in and they can buy the house and nobody asks any questions. So reverse onus means, where did the money come from? You have to prove how you got $5 million in cash to pay for the house. But we don't see that.
So our audience, I mean, honestly, if you aren't kind of like your eyes popping now to hear those issues related to the left hand not knowing what the right hand is doing and not really having the tools of enforcement that other countries have, you can see why our allies would have concerns about it. So David, is Scott's analysis a little bit, well, I don't know, dramatic, histrionic, whatever you want to call it, or what do you see? I mean, you only did what was it again? Oh yeah, counterterrorism. What are you seeing? What's your analysis, David?
I believe Scott is underselling.
Underselling.
I mean, he knows way more than he can possibly give our audience in the short period of time that we've got. The big issues are very clear. The national security of our country, all 9 pieces of it are compromised, and they've been compromised intentionally. And so we have at least a decade to rebuild each of those 9 major institutions and give them the legislative tools they need. But then we've got to give them the resources. And what we see time and again by any government, not just the ones that we see currently, but by any government, is they believe once legislation is passed, the job is done. They never resource with the 7 resources that make up any activity, starting with people, starting with money, starting with equipment, supplies, and all the infrastructure they need to get the job done. So let's use the Port of Vancouver as an example. We know, it's been reported even in the legacy media, the terrible challenges of inspecting of containers coming through the Port of Vancouver. A problem that can be solved, a problem that won't be solved because no one will put the resources to it in terms of people, equipment, supplies, and the infrastructure. And it can be done. There are so many technologies that we have at our fingertips today to at least look for human trafficking, see if there's something like warm bodies inside the containers in a very fast method, but then the ability to sniff for drugs and everything else to do more than 1% of the containers. That's one little tiny piece of a great, huge set of issues across every one of those 9 elements of national security that our partners to the south are looking at us. But at the same time, we need to rebuild our economy so that we can afford to put the resources to all of these things. And we need to take our resource industry, our manufacturing industry, our value-added industry, all those into. We need to take this country and give it an injection of adrenaline and get it moving again instead of destroying it.
Right on. So this has been a very powerful conversation. We have a lot to get through here yet this afternoon. So I want to just reference quickly that the U.S. administration has done the quote impossible when it comes to their southern border. It's been reported this past week that in the month of May, they had how many illegal entries? 0. And this is in contrast with the estimated number of some 15 to 20 million illegal migrants coming into the United States under the Biden administration. This is extraordinary. And the 3 that were apprehended were sent promptly back to their country of origin. So it's very interesting. I follow Dr. Stephen Camarado, who's the director of research at the Center for Immigration Studies. And he said, this all relates back to basic behavioral analysis. And I think one of you mentioned this before, is that if you have the probability, the sense that you're going to get a speeding ticket, what do? You slow down. And so out there is the perception that the United States is managing its border, it's closed, and they're offering open doors to legal immigration. Is the same perception exist in Canada? What's the perception around our border security? Well, it's like Swiss cheese, isn't it? Isn't that the bottom line?
If I can just start off with the fact, Canada's surrounded on 3 sides by oceans. So yes, some of them come up from the United States, but the vast majority of illegals that are coming into our country come in on airplanes. And so it's pretty easy to identify the ports of entry of the illegals that are pouring into our country and to manage it right there and send them back. This is not an insurmountable task. Those 3 wonderful oceans that surround our country have always given us this huge advantage. We have chosen to deny our border services and the RCMP the right to detain and return these people. We release them daily into our public and expect them, as our minister constantly says, to voluntarily remove themselves from our country. Well, absolute lunacy.
Wow. This is, I think, the definition of insanity, folks. Bad public policy serving whom? And so that's another question. Who does this serve? It certainly doesn't serve Canadians, in my humble opinion. So let's move on here. We've got a defense announcement. We know that the other big issue that was underlined by the U.S. administration was that Canada needs to get with a program, rebuild its military, meet its contractual obligation of, what is it again? 2% in NATO. Memorize that. So this announcement made by the Prime Minister, what's your analysis? Here he is with a number of persons in tow, including Defense Minister McGuinty there. Um, I mean, I've heard this announcement before over the decades. What do you say? Is this more head fakes or is this potential hope that we actually get the security file? David, you want to go first and then Scott?
Absolute rhetoric. Back in 2015, the Liberal government declared we were going to have 88 new CF-35s. We were going to have 18 new ships. We were going to have new equipment for the Army. In 10 years, a decade later, there was nothing. This is nothing but rhetoric. This is a public announcement because the G7 was about to happen and the NATO ministers was about to happen. What's fundamentally wrong with the armed forces of Canada is a complete lack of trust in Canadian citizens in the institution, which they now refuse to join. The base of any armed forces, number one, is its purpose. And if you don't define what the purpose of the Canadian Armed Forces is clearly and constantly to the Canadian public, no one will join a fractured, destroyed institution. The second most important element is people. And we know that even people that are joining are leaving within a year or 2 years because they say, once they have joined, that the institution has its priorities completely wrong. Even CBC reported that last week. So as fast as you get someone in, they walk back out the door. We have what the Minister of National Defense called a death spiral, and this government will do nothing to stop that death spiral. It's not just about equipment. It's not just about training. It's about actually defining the purpose of the Canadian Forces clearly, coherently. When we do that, I give you the highway of heroes. When our troops were deployed to Afghanistan, the Canadian public was massively in support of our Canadian Armed Forces, and we had record enrollment and people being trained with a real purpose, and we bought some equipment relatively quickly. This entire discussion about buying equipment from Europe and making our supply lines go in the wrong direction when the real enemy is in the Pacific, not in Europe for Canada, and that the need for equipment which we can interoperate with our largest trading partner and our national security partner for the defense of North America, we need to get serious. But first, what is the role of the Canadian Armed Forces for the national security of Canada as the force of last resort? And we never hear that. We just hear, oh, we're going to go buy some kit. For who? To do what? Let's talk about the three oceans and how we're going to give surveillance, then target acquisition, then target neutralization to defend the sovereignty of our country. Those three steps define the equipment we need just for that first tax, which is sovereignty. This government is not serious, never has been serious. And until we get a government that is serious, the national security in terms of the Canadian Armed Forces, the force of last resort, is completely compromised and nobody will join it.
Your thoughts, Scott, on David's analysis?
Well, I'm going to lighten it up a little bit. And I'm just going to say, it's funny that we hear these announcements. The timing definitely, as David has mentioned, is suspect. But when Canada can't shoot down a balloon flying over its territory, and
What balloon was that again, Scott?
The Chinese balloon that was shot down over Canada, where our prime minister stated that he directed an aircraft to go and do that, which is not true. NORAD had to act, and NORAD had to use the United States aircraft because our aircraft can't fly that high. We don't have the ability to shoot down a balloon. That's where it's concerning to hear things like we're going to start spending all this money on kit. And I agree with you. I think that we'll go back to the behavioral science piece. How many people in Canada are going to sign up to go and serve in the Arctic? Because I can tell you right now, the Arctic is somewhere that we get deployed. And if you stay there for 6 months, you get a medal. So people don't gravitate towards the North in the way that I think a lot of people think, especially with the Arctic, what's happening now. How are we going to protect our coastline? Well, now they're talking about including the Coast Guard into the military, which is great. But think about how long that would take to integrate, and not to mention the fact that none of our Coast Guard ships are armed, unlike most of the other countries in the world. Mexico has a bigger navy than Canada. We don't have any of the assets needed to protect this country, let alone force project and get involved in a conflict anywhere outside of our own littoral waters. So it's very difficult to make people believe that you're going to be improving these things when historically, as David mentioned, you've promised these things and never come through. So the trust is eroded. Um, I'd like to believe, I'd love to believe that there's going to be change, but I don't see it. And the root cause is not necessarily the kit. I'm going to say, I remember when I was in the military, and I'm sure David can attest to this, the pride you have inside of you for wearing that uniform. And that pride, I think, has diminished beyond anything anyone can imagine. Is that when you're proud of your country, when that national anthem plays and you get tears in your eyes, that's the passion that you need to join the military. And we don't have that in Canada because it is so fractured, so divested in its own citizens that people just don't believe in it. There's no belief, there's no vision, there's no reason to join the military because what are they going to do? We don't do anything. We rely on the United States. And most people that you talk to will say, well, if Russia comes over the poles or China invades, the Americans aren't going to let that happen. Well, what they don't realize is that makes us a buffer zone. And that means that a lot of people are going to die in this country if something like that happened. So the pride piece, the root cause of why our military is in the situation it is in, isn't just financial. It isn't just in those commitments. It's an overcommitment, and I would say a denial on the status of where we're at right now, and how we get to the next level. That's a whole nother question. But when you have a conflict like what we're seeing in the Middle East and in Ukraine, these things become more lively, and Canadians are starting to wake up to it. And hopefully, something is done.
Okay, well, speaking of waking up, this certainly is a wake-up call. This discussion, the need to improve not only our border security, our military, and our commitment to NATO, but certainly rebuilding our prosperity. It's all interrelated. So I want to shift now quickly to the Iran conflict with Israel and that scene. I want to just lay the groundwork here a little bit. We've heard a lot about the many hundreds of strikes that Israel is undertaking on Iran. Here we've got a picture of some of that activity. And of course, Iran is responding in turn with its attacks on Israel as well. But clearly, it's been stated that the objective here is to ensure that there are no nuclear weapons in Iran, to disable that program that has been bubbling along in Iran for quite some time. And that concern has been articulated by many, including President Donald Trump, over some, I believe it's 15 years, saying the objective should not enable Iran in any way. Here is the Ayatollah, the leader of Iran, I think, looking at, I believe that's a rocket. I don't know if it's a technically an ICBM, but it's some type of delivery system there. So the concern is that Israel did not want to wait any longer, as they estimate that somehow publicly, as stated by their prime minister, that Iran is some 6 months away from having a nuclear capability. It's interesting that history has a way of kind of repeating itself, or some say speaking in rhymes. It reminds me of, remember this very well, Israel proactively attacking Iran. I think it was in 1981 on a similar mission. So they've done this before. Now there's a number of options to take over, I believe, the third nuclear weapons installation. They've destroyed 2 already. But one of course, is to send in commandos. A second one is to bomb it through a kind of a larger device that only the U.S. has, a so-called bunker buster bomb, one of these huge 30,000-pound devices. And I believe there's probably a third option, but I think it relates to some kind of surgical strike to take over those that installation. So my question to you, gentlemen, is what does this mean at this point? Are we being hoodwinked, or is the U.S. being dragged into a unnecessary war? I've heard the rhetoric change now from getting rid of nuclear weapons capability to regime change. Who wants another Iraq? But where do you see this at, and why does this matter to Canada? David, do you want to go first?
All right, let me take you back to ancient history. I joined the Army in 1972, and following the 1973 Yom Kippur War, I was part of the United Nations Emergency Force 2, stationed in the Sinai Desert for 6 months. It gave me the opportunity to travel all of Egypt, big chunks of Syria, parts of Jordan, and all of Israel. When you're in the Golan Heights and you go up to Mount Hermon and you take a pair of binoculars, you can see the Mediterranean. Okay, if you look to the west, Israel is a tiny, tiny country. You can't understand it till you've been there and looked from one side to the other side with your naked eyeball and a pair of binos. Israel has no option but to be proactive in its own defense. It saw what happened in the 73 war. They had to wait until they were actually attacked. Now, moving forward from that history, they now have a stable relationship with Egypt, a massively stable relationship with Jordan, perhaps, maybe, with Syria in the near future. I'm not convinced yet. Lebanon is getting better. When I was there, the whole thing blew up in Lebanon and Hezbollah started to attack. That was back in the 70s. So this has been going on a long time. So Israel has to be proactive. If it doesn't, every one of its citizens will be annihilated. There is no option. And we've seen what's happened in ancient history with the Jewish race. They're not prepared to let it happen. So I believe Israel was at the tipping point. It knew that just a couple of nukes can basically wipe out every major city in their country. They knew that Iran had the missile capability. All they had to do was put the warhead on the end of it. So I don't blame Israel at all for what it's doing. Now I'm speaking as a Canadian. It's not my war, other than the IRGC, which is Iran's military, is marching in our streets in Canada. And so what Israel is doing, if
Well,
they
wait a sec,
can
David.
actually,
Can you just clarify that? What do you mean by that? What are you getting at?
the
That there's-
IRGC, as Scott has talked about, as I've talked about, the largest center for them outside of their country is in Vancouver. We knew after September 11th in counterterrorism in our province that the largest funding for both Al-Qaeda and ISIS was Alberta, in fact, in the early 2000s. These people are here, but now they're not doing it clandestine. They're overt marching in our streets. So let's take this back to what Israel's doing. If Israel can disrupt the funding linkage coming from China through their purchase of oil into Iran, and therefore funding the IRGC's activities in Canada, if Israel can disrupt the IRGC's operations, it will diminish the operations in our country. And so it is
So
important.
there's what we just
that
just back up for a sec. So you're
Yeah.
saying, I mean, this is almost like out of a movie. You've got the main purchaser of Iranian oil. Like, this regime is really being propped up. Most of the people in Iran do not like this regime. It's being propped up by who's buying most of their oil? 90% of their oil is sold to
China. The Bricks and Road
China.
Initiative has 147 countries in the world voting in the United Nations how China tells them to. One of those 147 is Iran. And Iran's economy is based on China overpaying for all the oil coming out of Iran that it can get.
overpaying.
And so they are overpaying so they can fund world instability using China. Now, remember, we talk about Iran using proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, all these proxies. Well, Iran is a proxy for China. China is paying Iran to cause destabilizing actions all through Europe,
For Pete's sake.
Canada, the United States. And so the Chinese money coming into Iran, going into the IRGC, coming to Canada. So you want to, strategically, I'm a Canadian. So I care about Canada first, right? I also care about Israel, but Canada first. Israel's actions can help Canada by making it either impossible or much more limited the funding that IRGC can give to its destabilizing actions globally. And so if ultimately there's a regime change, and that's for other people to decide other than me, but if we remove the IRGC as the arm for funding terrorism worldwide, that will have a positive effect on the countries of Europe, Canada, the United States, and the world generally.
Okay, so just picking up on that, and clearly that's thank you for outlining that set of dominoes. Again, the Communist Party of China playing a foundational role behind Iran is Iran in turn funds all kinds of other actors and other things. It's very complicated. But the point is wake up and see these connections and their implications on Canada are profound. So as we look at this, David, what should be the objective? If you were in the White House Situation Room and you're advising President Donald J. Trump, because he's got the keys to the what are they called, bunker buster bombs. What should be the objective? Is it just knocking out the nuclear program, or is it regime change?
Okay, we've seen worldwide when we try and do regime change as a Western role. Okay, I'm not talking about Canada or the United States. As the West, we're terrible at it. One of when I talk about Canadian values and ethics, one of the things Canadians have always stood for is to help countries when they ask for help, but never to interfere in a foreign power. So the United States should make its decisions based on its national interests, all 6 of them, and define whether or not regime change is in their interest. I certainly would never advise that will turn out well, because when you do it, you have to be prepared to actually assist whatever replaces it if you think it's going to be better. And what we've routinely seen is when regime changes are instigated by foreign countries, what results later is worse than what was there before because they didn't think it through. So I believe it's up to the Iranian people to choose their future. I'm hoping that perhaps they're seeing this as an opportunity to overthrow the current regime, but I hope they have a plan for a better one that will give them a better way of life for their future as they wish to define it. I don't support any country doing a regime change in another country. I don't believe that's what Canadians stand for, but every country can choose their own path. And certainly Canada doesn't have the ability to influence it either way.
Okay, that's very helpful. So you're partial to I think it was General Colin Powell who said if you break it, then you own it. So that's probably well said. So Scott, what should be the objective when it comes to the situation in Iran? Any wisdom on that?
Yeah, well, I'm gonna preface it with a little bit of information. In the global game of risk, traditionally people have thought that how the world works, especially when it comes to power struggles, is who has the most tanks, the most planes, and the most boats, and that's when you're going to get into a conflict. And we also were at a stage where there was peace between wars. That is no longer the case and hasn't been for a while. By Iran being involved in something called CRINCS, okay, so China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. Okay, so that's an alliance. We noticed a little bit of something here in Canada when we had the Huawei fiasco, right? And that was over an Iranian sanction between China and Iran.
Wait a sec. There's a number of things here you're talking about, Scott. Can we just break that down?
Sure.
CRINCS?
Sure, CRINCS. CRINCS is an alliance. It's China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. So those countries are aligned just like the Five Eyes in Canada, between Canada, the United States, Great Britain, New Zealand, and Australia. They have their own alliance. They share information. They share troops. They share training. They share all the same things that we would. And with what's going on in Iran right now, you have to understand that that's one major piece. 16% of the oil that China receives comes from Iran. That's pretty significant. It's not all of the oil, but like David said, a lot of it's illicit because it's going through sanctions. So by trying to control Iran, it hasn't worked. Iran has publicly stated 2 decades ago that they were not going to play by the rules. They were going to use Hezbollah to do transnational narco terrorism. I lived in Manama, Bahrain at US NAVCENT headquarters for a year as a diplomatic defense attaché. We looked at the Somali piracy piece, but we definitely watched what was going on in the Straits of Hormuz and Iran. So we know kind of what was happening. We actually proved that, yes, terrorists work with criminals. That's a huge thing because Iran has assets in countries you wouldn't even believe. They're in Mexico, they're in Cuba, they're in Venezuela, they're in Argentina. They're all over the place conducting operations to undermine the West. So by regime change, okay, sure. So you're going to come in and the people are going to rise up and we're going to go back to a more modern society with better, more Western rules. But all of those assets are external. They're out there. And this is the concern that people have right now, that there's sleeper cells and other things. And they're not wrong. But what people forget is they're not acting alone. They're working with the CRINC alliance. That means they're working with the Chinese. They're working with the North Koreans. So the asymmetric threats that are going to persist are concerning. And when you talk about Canada's economic stability and all this, business requires stability, and stability requires security. When Canada makes token efforts at their security, allowing these different organizations to operate here unabated, then naturally we're not going to get anywhere. In fact, we're probably going to be worse off because now they're forced to do more than they would when they had their homeland still intact and they could operate out of there and still have the money coming in from China. Now they have to go and get it. I'd say that the threat globally is going to go through the roof. And I would dare say that contingency planning in the United States right now and Israel, because Israel's been doing this for a very long time, is going to look at all of the factors. Moving 3 aircraft carrier groups into the region is not a small token of our show of force. This is much larger than people realize. We're on the brink of World War III. The potential for nuclear weapons being deployed is real. This isn't Israel and Syria and these skirmishes, I'll call them, even though they are wars, right? So we have Yemen with the Houthis, and we have the Syrians, and we have the Lebanese, and we have all of these groups trying to attack Israel. But Israel is aligned with the United States and other Western allies. That causes a lot of conflict. The conflict isn't just military. It's everything. Hybrid warfare is every means possible short of conventional war, which is where we're getting to undermine your adversary. That means all the banking stuff, all the narcotic stuff, everything you can think of, the realist, everything is tied together. It's very complex. It's difficult to understand, but just know that there are people in this country right now trying to undermine everything we're trying to do for good, we think is for good, to help keep Canada safe and our allies safe. Until
So this is
we're not going to get anywhere.
No, I hear you, Scott. This is quite a powerful analysis that both of you have provided. And I appreciate how you're connecting the dots between these domestic and geopolitical issues and how this strikes to the heart, frankly, of not only a more prosperous, better Canada, but it strikes to the heart of our sovereignty. We are in a multidimensional conflict right now, a war. And so we've got a lot of work to do in our country to rebuild our security, our economy, and all the rest. And these are interrelated. I guess I look at this also from the picture that surely this situation, this reality, underlines the importance of developing our energy resources so that we can actually supply energy. I mean, if we look at Iran, this is a bad regime, and we know that the priority, the goal is to get rid of their nuclear program. But surely this kind of emerging conflict should underline the importance, the urgency of getting those pipelines of energy in Canada to market. I should also mention that the irony is that we hurt ourselves as Canadians by not getting world prices for our product. And Frontier's done a lot of research on this where we don't get full market prices. So we actually have a calculator on our website showing, and this is took quite a bit of work to develop as a model, illustrates minute by minute the money that we're losing. It's between 30, 35, 40 billion dollars a year because it's a dynamic price of how much money we're leaving on the table. I mean, this is absurd. And this is because of bad public policy, bad leadership, if you will. So I think this is an incredible opportunity for us if we get it right to improve our economy and also our national security. And meanwhile, we have a parliament, I think, that is, what is it again? On vacation. They're not sitting. I don't get this. We need more transparency and healthy debate more than ever, don't we, David? Like, why aren't we discussing these issues publicly?
It's intentional. So let's talk about rebuilding all 6 of our national interests, because until we take all of them seriously, unity, national security, good governance. Let's just talk about good governance for a second. Until we have a transparent parliament that is prepared to sit and work. We haven't had a parliament for a year. Until we have a parliament that takes all of the pieces of our national interest seriously and focuses on rebuilding our country, getting the GDP per capita up, is through doing all of the economic prosperity and growth piece. But it's very hard to do when you're pitting one side of a country against the other side of the country, when you're trying to say that different ethnic and cultural groups are more important than others, when you're attacking religions but defending other religions that are attacking religions. Mm-hmm. We need a unity within our country, followed by some serious moves on national security, and then prop it up with economic prosperity and growth. And so when you have a bill like C-69, which is designed to slow down the development of all your industry, making it impossible to dig a mine in less than 15 years, and then you come up with C-5 and pretend that you're going to remove that all, but you hand to a very small group of elected officials, i.e. the cabinet of a party, the ability to define what is in a national interest, you're moving towards a totalitarian government instead of Parliament sitting all summer like they should and moving all of these issues forward in a time of, as said by the Prime Minister, a time of crisis. But we can go on holidays till the fall and we can run a country without a budget. That means we're being run by a group of people who don't have a plan. And as both Scott and I know, without a plan, there is no action. And a plan only survives till you get to the line of departure. But if you make your plan right, your plan is adjustable. But with no plan, you can use wedge issues, you can do nothing and make it look like you're doing something with lots of rhetoric and nothing happening behind. So we need a parliament that's going to sit and discuss these issues openly and positively. The good governance of our government has been destroyed for quite some time. We need to get it back to business, and Canadians need to demand it. And as long as Canadians remain silent on these issues, the government will continue to move in the way that it has for the past 10 years, which is with no involvement of Canadians.
Okay, well said, David. Scott, what's your comment as we round things off?
I'm going to be really upfront right now, which I tend to try to be a little bit softer, but I'm going to be very straightforward. Canada allows the enemy, and that is China, because we're at war with China right now. China attacks us through cyber, not just cyber, but cyber,
right,
3,000 times a minute to our government agencies. They're attacking us, and yet we allow them to purchase critical infrastructure. We're selling crown land to Chinese corporations, which are state-run or state-owned. People have to understand, in China, there's no such thing as someone from China that's rich. All these ideas that, Alibaba and all these things are individuals that have built these companies up. They're not. They're propped up by the state. They can be taken down anytime they want. The former head of Interpol was China. China kidnapped the head of Interpol. So you can't trust people that are attacking you. You can't be in business with them. And until Canada, I mean, we're talking about de-risking and decoupling, until Canada decouples, or at least takes note that you are doing business with the devil, we're in trouble. And I would mention the BC Ferries contract, which is
BC
very,
Ferries?
very
You wrote about
significant.
that, didn't you, Scott
I
McGregor?
did. I just wrote an op-ed on it.
BC Ferries, what is that about briefly?
Well, briefly, the BC Ferries wants to replace about 5 ferries. And instead of having them built in Canada or an allied country, they've decided that they're going to go to the cheapest country, China, and hope that, they follow through on the contract, that they don't hold us hostage like they have with canola and other agricultural things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Doing business with a country that is your adversary can be beneficial if you're trying to negate a conflict. Here's the problem. Canada isn't capable of being in a major conflict with China. We can't.
Mhm.
The population of 2 cities covers the entire population in Canada. So if we don't have the United States aligned with us, where we're causing problems right now, where we're, elbows up and all this good stuff, Canada is a sitting duck for these things. We're overrun. We're called a vassal state of China by many analysts already.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
when we sacrifice our economy in that manner, I don't see how we're going to move forward with the United States, especially because they are trying to do the opposite. So we are undermining efforts to try to restrict China from being able to get into North America. I may have mentioned the term continentalism before, where we're moving away from sovereign states trying to just defend themselves and moving into a larger uh, region. So for us, that's North America. Europe has Europe. Australia is its own continent. So we need
Mhm.
to identify the fact that no one is addressing the Chinese. We have people in parliament that are elected by our citizens who are in cahoots with the Chinese government. Let me say that again. People in parliament are in cahoots with the Chinese government. And I say the Chinese government, you have to remember that includes their businesses. So if you're seeing these people do these agreements, just like BC Ferries, then you got to start to question what our vision is, our governance, our security, and what it's for. Because if you're just doing it as a token effort to appease the United States, you're missing the point.
Okay. This has been a far-reaching conversation, gentlemen. I want to thank you, Scott McGregor and Colonel David Redman. We're so grateful for this discussion where we've dared to peel the perennial onion in terms of domestic and geopolitical issues, and really everything is on the table. Our prosperity, our quality of life, and indeed our sovereignty. And as people have their elbows up, maybe we need to put our heads up and open our eyes and talk about our real conversation about our sovereignty and security and how it's all on the table. So I want to thank you again, Scott and David, for this conversation. And to our audience, your comments have been many, and please share this conversation. I think this matters not only to us, but the next generation. There's no doubt about it. So the question is, will Canada grow up as a nation, or will we go quietly into the night? So thank you very much, and thank you for this conversation.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, David. Thanks for the comment, Tricia.
So I again thank you to everyone participating in this conversation. We'll see you next week, this Thursday, on Leaders on the Frontier, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for watching Leaders on the Frontier. We're a nonpartisan think tank. We explore ideas, policy, and practical solutions that can make a difference in the lives of Canadians. We do not accept any government funding. We work for you. Thank you for supporting Frontier. Visit fcpp.org to give. While you're there, be sure to check out our latest articles and research. Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.